Hash from love to lawsuit. How I ruined my cheating partner's career. I found the receipt on a Tuesday, tucked inside the pocket of Kyle's favorite jacket. The one I was taking to the dry cleaners because he'd spilled wine on it at dinner. Except the receipt told a completely different story about where that wine had actually been spilled. It was from the Belmont Hotel, dated last Friday when Kyle claimed he'd been working late on a massive client presentation. Room service for two. Champagne, strawberries, and chocolate-covered everything. The total was $347, which was more than our monthly grocery budget. My name is Vanessa Cole, and I'm a tax attorney specializing in corporate law. That receipt was about to become Exhibit A in the biggest case of my career. I stood in our bedroom, holding that stupid piece of paper, watching 3 years of my life crumble like a stale cookie. Kyle wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my colleague at Morrison & Associates, the law firm where we'd both worked for 2 years. We'd met during a boring corporate merger case and bonded over terrible office coffee and shared ambition. Now, he was apparently bonding with someone else over expensive hotel champagne. The worst part wasn't even the cheating, though that hurt like someone had punched me directly in the stomach. The worst part was that I'd been completely clueless. I'd noticed nothing suspicious. No weird phone calls, no mysterious late nights that felt off, no distant behavior. Kyle had seemed perfectly normal, kissing me goodbye every morning and asking about my day every evening like nothing was wrong. I'd actually thought we were happy together. I'd been mentally planning our future, imagining proposals and wedding venues and maybe eventually some kids. Meanwhile, he'd been planning secret hotel visits with someone else entirely. I sat on our bed, still clutching that receipt, feeling like the world's biggest fool. My cat, Professor Whiskers, rubbed against my leg sympathetically. At least someone in this apartment was loyal. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to cry or scream or throw his belongings out the window like they do in movies. I was going to be smart, strategic, and absolutely ruthless. Kyle had messed with the wrong tax attorney. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson about lying to someone who understood exactly how to destroy people legally. I didn't confront Kyle immediately, which probably surprised anyone who knew my normally direct personality. Instead, I became a detective, carefully gathering evidence while acting completely normal. Kyle noticed nothing different because he was too busy sneaking around behind my back. I checked our shared credit card statements, which he'd foolishly never bothered hiding properly. Turns out the Belmont Hotel wasn't a one-time thing. There were 4 separate charges over the past 2 months, always on Fridays when he claimed to be working late. There were also charges from fancy restaurants I'd never visited and flower purchases I'd certainly never received. I took screenshots of everything, organized them by date in a neat folder on my laptop labeled Project Karma. My best friend Aaliyah came over that weekend, while Kyle was supposedly at the gym. She'd been suspicious of him for months, dropping hints I'd stupidly ignored. "I knew that man was shady," she said, scrolling through my evidence folder with growing anger. "Want me to slash his tires, key his car, post his number online with a weird message." I appreciated her violent enthusiasm but had bigger plans brewing. The really damaging evidence came from Kyle's own arrogance and carelessness. He'd been using his work laptop for personal emails, which was against firm policy, but something everyone did anyway. One night while he showered, I quickly accessed his computer. His password was laughably predictable, just his birthday backwards. Inside his email, I discovered something way worse than just hotel receipts. Kyle had been having an affair with Sienna, a junior associate at our firm who'd started 6 months ago. That was inappropriate enough given the power dynamics, but it got worse. Their emails revealed Kyle had been sharing confidential client information with her, including details about cases she wasn't assigned to. He was basically showing off, trying to impress her with inside knowledge. As a lawyer, I immediately recognized this as a serious ethical violation. Attorneys have strict confidentiality obligations to their clients. Sharing private case details with unauthorized people could get Kyle disbarred completely. I took screenshots of every single email, my hands shaking slightly with a mixture of rage and excitement. Kyle wasn't just a cheating boyfriend anymore. He was a lawyer who'd violated his professional ethics, and I had documented proof. Monday morning, I went to work acting completely normal, even kissing Kyle goodbye like nothing had changed. We drove separately because I claimed to have an early meeting. In reality, I needed time alone to finalize my plan. At the office, I scheduled a meeting with Harold Patterson, the senior partner who managed ethical compliance. Harold was a serious man in his 60s who'd built his reputation on integrity and following rules precisely. He didn't tolerate any violations, no matter who committed them. "Vanessa, come in," Harold said, gesturing to the chair across from his massive desk. "What can I do for you this morning?" I took a deep breath, opened my laptop, and showed him everything. The emails where Kyle shared confidential client information, the dates and times, the clear evidence of ethical violations. I didn't mention the affair initially, just focused on the professional misconduct. Harold's expression grew darker with each screenshot. "This is extremely serious," he said finally, his voice heavy with disappointment. "These communications violate attorney-client privilege and our firm's ethical standards. I'll need to report this to the State Bar Association immediately." He paused, studying my face carefully. "How did you discover this information?" I'd prepared for this question, knowing my answer needed to be honest but strategic. "Kyle is my boyfriend," I admitted, watching Harold's eyebrows rise in surprise. "I discovered he was having an affair with Sienna Hayes, another associate here. While gathering evidence of his personal betrayal, I found these professional violations on his work computer. I know this is complicated given our relationship, but I couldn't ignore such serious ethical breaches." Harold nodded slowly, processing this information. "That must be incredibly difficult for you personally. However, you did the right thing bringing this forward. Attorney ethics must be maintained regardless of personal relationships." He closed my laptop, his expression firm. "I'll be launching an immediate investigation. Kyle and Sienna will both be suspended pending review. Given the clear evidence you've provided, I anticipate this will result in termination and possible disbarment proceedings." He looked at me with something like respect. "This took courage, Vanessa. Many people would have looked the other way to protect someone they loved." I smiled tightly. "I don't protect people who betray trust, professional or personal." That afternoon, Harold called Kyle into his office. I watched from my desk as Kyle walked past, looking confused and slightly annoyed at the interruption. He came out 20 minutes later looking like he'd seen a ghost, pale and shaking. His eyes found mine across the office, and I watched realization dawn on his face. He knew. He knew I'd discovered everything and reported him. Kyle stormed over to my desk, his face red with anger. "You reported me," he hissed, trying to keep his voice down in the open office. "You actually went to Harold about private emails." I looked up calmly from my computer, my expression neutral. "I reported a lawyer who violated attorney-client privilege and shared confidential information without authorization. That's my ethical obligation as an attorney myself." Other associates were starting to notice our conversation, heads turning curiously. Kyle leaned closer, his voice shaking with rage. "This is because of Sienna, isn't it? You're jealous and trying to ruin my career over personal drama." I smiled coldly. "Your career is ruined because you broke the law and violated professional ethics, Kyle. The affair just helped me discover your violations. You did this to yourself." Security arrived then, called by Harold to escort Kyle from the building. He was officially suspended, banned from accessing firm property until the investigation concluded. Watching him being walked out like a criminal was incredibly satisfying, I won't lie. The office erupted into gossip within hours, which I'd completely expected. Everyone wanted to know what had happened between Kyle and me. Some people were sympathetic, offering supportive words and coffee. Others seemed to blame me somehow, whispering that I'd overreacted to a personal issue by destroying his professional life. I ignored all of it, focusing on my work and letting the investigation proceed. Aaliyah called me during lunch, having heard the news through the legal community grapevine. "Girl, you actually did it," she said, sounding equal parts shocked and impressed. "Kyle's already trending on legal Twitter. People are calling him the stupidest lawyer in history for sharing confidential info over email." That made me laugh despite everything. He thought he was impressing Sienna with his important cases and insider knowledge. Instead, he created a perfect evidence trail of his own ethical violations. Aaliyah cackled. "Karma is a lawyer named Vanessa, apparently." Sienna got suspended too, though her involvement was less severe since she'd mainly just received information rather than sharing it. Still, she'd known it was wrong and hadn't reported it, which was its own ethical violation. The State Bar Association moved quickly once Harold submitted his report. They launched their own investigation, interviewing clients whose confidential information Kyle had compromised. Several clients were furious, threatening to sue both Kyle and the firm. Morrison and Associates had to hire crisis management consultants to handle the fallout. Insurance companies got involved because of potential malpractice claims. It became this huge mess that spread far beyond just Kyle's personal misconduct. The managing partners called a firm-wide meeting to address the situation. They assured everyone that appropriate actions were being taken and that Morrison and Associates maintained the highest ethical standards. They didn't name Kyle directly, but everyone knew exactly who they were talking about. After the meeting, Harold pulled me aside privately. "The Bar Association wants to interview you as the reporting party," he explained. "They'll ask about how you discovered the violations and what you observed. Just tell the truth exactly as it happened." I nodded, feeling surprisingly calm about the whole process. "When do they want to meet?" Harold checked his phone. "Tomorrow afternoon at 2. I'll accompany you as firm counsel if you'd like support." I appreciated the offer and accepted. That evening, Kyle showed up at our apartment, apparently forgetting that he'd essentially been caught cheating and committing professional violations. I'd changed the locks that afternoon during lunch, a precaution Aaliyah had wisely suggested. He pounded on the door, shouting my name. I opened it with the chain still attached, looking at him through the gap. "What do you want, Kyle?" He looked terrible, unshaven and wearing the same clothes from this morning. "We need to talk, Vanessa." "You've completely destroyed everything over a stupid mistake." I almost laughed at his characterization. Multiple affairs and sharing confidential client information aren't stupid mistakes. They're deliberate choices with serious consequences. Kyle's expression shifted to something like desperation. "Please, if you withdraw your complaint to the Bar Association, maybe I can salvage my career. We can work through the personal stuff in couples therapy or whatever." I stared at him, amazed by his complete lack of understanding. "I'm not withdrawing anything. You violated your professional ethics and betrayed multiple people's trust. Those consequences are entirely your fault." I started to close the door, but he grabbed it. "Vanessa, please, I'll lose everything. My career, my reputation, everything I've worked for." I met his eyes steadily, feeling no sympathy whatsoever. "You should have considered those consequences before you decided to cheat on me and violate client confidentiality. Actions have consequences, Kyle. Welcome to yours." I firmly closed the door, locked it, and walked away while he continued shouting outside. Eventually, he gave up and left. Professor Whiskers meowed his approval from the couch. The Bar Association interview the next day was straightforward and professional. They asked detailed questions about how I'd discovered the emails, what they contained, and whether I believed Kyle understood he was violating ethical rules. I answered everything honestly, providing copies of all my evidence. The investigator, a stern woman named Patricia Hughes, reviewed everything carefully. "This is one of the clearest cases of ethical violations I've seen," she said finally. "The email communications show deliberate sharing of confidential information with no legitimate professional purpose." She looked at me seriously. "I know this situation involves your personal relationship. That must make it even more difficult." I shrugged slightly. Honestly, discovering his professional violations made the personal betrayal easier to handle. At least I know I'm doing the right thing professionally. The formal charges came 2 weeks later. Kyle faced multiple counts of violating attorney-client privilege, improper disclosure of confidential information, and conduct involving dishonesty. The State Bar recommended suspension of his law license for a minimum of 3 years, with additional ethics training required before reinstatement. For a lawyer, losing your license is basically career death. Kyle would lose his job, obviously, but he'd also struggle to find any legal work afterward. His reputation was completely destroyed in the legal community. Nobody wants to hire a lawyer who can't keep client information confidential. The consequences spread even further. 2 clients whose information he'd shared filed malpractice lawsuits against him personally. Morrison and Associates settled with those clients for undisclosed amounts, then turned around and sued Kyle for damages. His financial future looked absolutely catastrophic. Meanwhile, I got promoted. Harold and the managing partners were impressed by my integrity in reporting the violations despite the personal cost. They offered me a junior partnership track position with a significant raise. "We need lawyers who prioritize ethics over personal convenience," Harold explained during my promotion meeting. Sienna faced lesser consequences since her involvement was more passive. She received a formal censure from the Bar Association and was terminated from Morrison and Associates. Her legal career wasn't completely destroyed, but it was definitely damaged. She'd have to explain this ethical violation in every future job interview. I heard through the office grapevine that she and Kyle were no longer together either. Apparently, their relationship fell apart quickly once the exciting secrecy was gone and replaced with unemployment and legal problems. Shocking absolutely nobody, their connection hadn't been built on anything substantial or lasting. Aaliyah took me out for celebratory drinks once everything was finalized. "You're officially a legend," she announced, raising her glass. "Lawyers across the city are telling your story as a warning about workplace affairs and ethical violations." I clinked my glass against hers. "Good. Maybe it'll prevent some other idiot from making Kyle's mistakes." She grinned mischievously. "Also, you're trending on legal TikTok. Someone made a dramatic reading of the Bar Association findings with sound effects. It's gotten like 2 million views." That was both horrifying and hilarious. I made her show me the video, and we laughed until our sides hurt. The lawsuits against Kyle dragged on for months, each one adding to his growing legal and financial problems. He had to hire his own attorney, which was expensive and ironic. His parents apparently had to help him pay legal fees, which I only knew because the legal community is surprisingly small and gossipy. I focused on my own career, throwing myself into work and enjoying my promotion. My caseload increased significantly, and I was finally getting assigned to major cases I'd previously only assisted with. The professional recognition felt amazing, a bright spot in what had been an emotionally difficult year. Kyle tried contacting me a few times through mutual friends, apparently wanting closure or to explain his side. I ignored every attempt. There was nothing he could say that would change anything. He'd made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. That's how accountability works. 6 months after everything started, I ran into Sienna at a coffee shop downtown. We'd both been carefully avoiding each other, but this encounter was unavoidable. She looked uncomfortable, clutching her coffee like a shield. "Vanessa," she said quietly, "can we talk for a minute?" I considered refusing, but decided I was curious about what she possibly had to say. We sat at a corner table, the awkwardness practically visible in the air between us. "I wanted to apologize," Sienna began, not quite meeting my eyes. "What I did was wrong on multiple levels. The affair, not reporting Kyle's ethical violations, all of it. I was stupid and selfish." I sipped my coffee, waiting for her to continue. She took a shaky breath. "I know you probably hate me, and you have every right to. I just wanted you to know that I'm genuinely sorry for the pain I caused. Kyle told me you two were basically over, that it was just a matter of time before you broke up officially. I believed him because I wanted to." I laughed bitterly at that familiar excuse. "And the confidential client information he kept sharing? What was your excuse for that?" Sienna flushed with shame. "I knew it was wrong, but I didn't want to lose his attention by calling him out. I thought if I seemed impressed by his knowledge, he'd continue being interested in me." It was manipulative and unethical. At least she was being honest now, even if it was way too late. "Your apology doesn't change anything," I said firmly. "You made choices that hurt people and violated professional ethics. Those consequences are permanent." Sienna nodded, looking miserable. "I know. I've been working as a paralegal now since no law firms will hire me as an associate. I might never recover my legal career." She paused. "But you were right to report everything. If you hadn't, Kyle would have kept sharing confidential information, and more clients would have been harmed. You protected people." I hadn't expected her to acknowledge that. "You could have reported it yourself at any time," I pointed out. "You chose not to because protecting your relationship with Kyle mattered more than protecting clients." Sienna stood up, recognizing our conversation was over. "I hope eventually you can forgive me, even if you never forget. I'm genuinely sorry, Vanessa." I watched her leave, feeling complicated emotions I couldn't quite name. I didn't forgive her, and probably never would. But I appreciated the apology anyway, even if it changed nothing. The final legal resolution came almost a year after I'd first found that hotel receipt. Kyle's law license was officially suspended for 5 years, a harsher penalty than initially recommended. The Bar Association had been unimpressed by his complete lack of remorse during hearings. He'd apparently spent the whole process blaming me for overreacting and destroying his career over personal jealousy. That attitude definitely hadn't helped his case. The malpractice lawsuits settled out of court for amounts that basically bankrupted him. He had to sell his car and move back in with his parents at age 32. I heard he was working at his uncle's insurance agency now, doing paperwork and making cold calls. Not quite the prestigious legal career he'd imagined for himself. Morrison and Associates moved past the scandal, though Kyle's name became a cautionary tale told to new associates. Don't be like Kyle was apparently now part of informal mentoring conversations about ethics and professionalism. My own career flourished. I made junior partner within 18 months, the fastest promotion in the firm's recent history. My specialty became professional ethics and legal malpractice, which had a certain poetic justice to it. Looking back on everything, people often asked if I felt guilty about destroying Kyle's career. The answer was simple. Absolutely not even a little bit. He destroyed his own career through his choices and actions. I'd simply reported violations I was ethically obligated to report. Any lawyer who discovered what I'd discovered would have had the same duty to come forward. If Kyle had just cheated without the professional violations, I would have simply ended the relationship and moved on with my life. Plenty of people cheat without losing their careers. But he'd gotten arrogant, sharing confidential information to impress his affair partner, creating evidence of serious ethical violations. That was entirely his own fault. The affair led me to discover the violations, but the violations themselves were the real problem. I was actually proud of how I'd handled everything. I'd been strategic rather than emotional, gathering proper evidence before acting. I'd focused on the professional misconduct rather than the personal betrayal when making my report. I'd let the system handle everything through proper channels rather than seeking personal revenge. Everything I'd done was completely legal and ethically correct. Kyle had simply experienced the natural consequences of his own actions. Aaliyah threw me a 1-year revenge anniversary party, which was ridiculous but also kind of hilarious. She invited our close friends and even some colleagues from work who'd supported me. We ate cake decorated with little fondant gavels and drank champagne that definitely wasn't from the Belmont Hotel. Everyone wanted to hear the full story, asking questions about what I'd felt at different moments. "When you found the receipt, did you immediately know you'd destroy him?" someone asked. I thought about that carefully. I knew I'd hold him accountable, but I didn't plan to destroy his career initially. That only happened after I discovered he'd been violating client confidentiality. At that point, it became about professional ethics, not personal revenge. Another friend asked if I'd consider dating again soon. I laughed, shaking my head firmly. "I'm focusing entirely on my career right now. After Kyle, I need time to trust my judgment again." Aaliyah raised her glass dramatically. "To Vanessa, who proved that the best revenge is watching someone destroy themselves while you simply document their downfall." Everyone cheered, and I couldn't help but smile. It was good to be surrounded by people who actually valued honesty and loyalty. Professor Whiskers had been my most consistent companion through everything. While my love life had exploded and my career had skyrocketed, he'd remained steadily unimpressed by all human drama. Every evening, he'd curl up on my lap while I worked on cases, purring contentedly. He didn't care about legal ethics or professional consequences. He just wanted regular meals and occasional chin scratches. There was something comforting about his simplicity. My parents had been shocked when I told them the whole story. They'd liked Kyle and thought we'd eventually get married. "I can't believe he was so stupid," my dad had said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Cheating on a lawyer and creating written evidence of professional violations. What was he thinking?" My mom had been more focused on my emotional well-being, worrying I was suppressing feelings by throwing myself into work. But honestly, work was the best therapy. Every successful case I handled, every client I helped, reminded me that I was good at my job and valued for my skills. That felt infinitely better than crying over some cheating idiot who hadn't deserved me in the first place. The legal community's reaction had been overwhelmingly supportive once people understood the full situation. Other attorneys, especially women, reached out to share their own stories of workplace relationships gone wrong. Several mentioned they'd experienced similar situations, but hadn't reported violations because of fear or misplaced loyalty. My story apparently inspired some people to come forward about ethical violations they'd been silently witnessing. That ripple effect felt meaningful and important. I gave a presentation at the State Bar Association's annual conference about recognizing and reporting ethical violations. Standing on that stage, talking to hundreds of lawyers about professional responsibility, felt surreal. This time last year, I'd been heartbroken and betrayed. Now I was literally a featured speaker on legal ethics. The universe definitely has a sense of humor. During the Q&A session, someone asked how I'd found the courage to report violations knowing it would end my relationship and possibly make me enemies at work. I'd thought about this question a lot over the months. Courage wasn't really involved, I answered honestly. Once I saw clear evidence of client confidentiality violations, I had no choice. Our obligation to clients outweighs personal relationships or workplace politics. If we don't maintain those standards, the entire legal profession loses credibility. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd never found that hotel receipt. Would Kyle have eventually confessed his affair? Would he have continued sharing confidential information until some major disaster occurred? Would I have married him, completely oblivious to his true character? Those thoughts were pointless but hard to avoid. In a weird way, finding that receipt had saved me from a much worse future. Better to discover someone's true nature after 3 years than after marriage and kids. Better to learn the lesson now than a decade from now. The universe had done me a favor, even though it definitely hadn't felt like one at the time. Kyle tried reaching out one final time on what would have been our 4-year anniversary. He sent a long email apologizing for everything and claiming he'd grown and changed through this experience. He talked about therapy and self-reflection and taking responsibility for his actions. The email ended with him asking if we could meet for coffee to talk. I deleted it without responding. Growth and change were great, but they didn't erase what he'd done or mean I owed him forgiveness or closure. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. My dating life remained non-existent, which was completely fine with me. Colleagues occasionally tried setting me up with lawyer friends or introducing me to people at professional events. I politely declined every time. Eventually, people stopped asking. Aaliyah worried I was becoming too closed off emotionally. "You can't let one terrible guy ruin relationships forever," she argued during one of our weekly dinners. Kyle was a lying cheater, but not every man is Kyle. I appreciated her concern but wasn't ready. "I'm genuinely happy right now," I explained. "Work is fulfilling, I've got great friends, Professor Whiskers keeps me company. I don't need a relationship to feel complete." She accepted that, though I could tell she remained skeptical. Maybe eventually I'd be ready to date again. But for now, I was perfectly content with my revenge-fueled career success and drama-free personal life. Being single definitely beat being cheated on and lied to. 2 years after everything started, Morrison and Associates made me a full partner, the youngest in the firm's history. The announcement came during a partners' meeting, and everyone applauded. Harold shook my hand firmly, looking proud. "You've earned this through exceptional work and unwavering ethical standards, Vanessa. Congratulations." That evening, I sat in my newly renovated office, looking at my name on the door with partner underneath. Vanessa Cole, partner. It felt surreal and wonderful. My phone buzzed with congratulations messages from friends and colleagues. Even some former law school classmates reached out, having heard the news through various networks. I poured myself a glass of wine and toasted my reflection in the window. "To karma, consequences, and becoming successful while your ex crashes and burns," I said aloud. Professor Whiskers meowed from his spot on my new leather chair, probably demanding dinner. Life was genuinely good. The vindictive part of me hoped Kyle heard about my partnership. I hoped he understood exactly what he'd lost when he'd chosen hotel rooms and affairs over honesty and loyalty. I hoped he spent sleepless nights regretting every stupid decision that had led to his downfall. But mostly, I just hoped he stayed far away from me and learned something from his spectacular failure. The best revenge really was living well and succeeding beyond anyone's expectations. I'd transformed my heartbreak into fuel for professional success, and it felt absolutely amazing. The story of how I'd ruined my cheating partner's career became somewhat legendary in legal circles. Young lawyers would occasionally recognize my name and ask if the stories were true. I'd usually just smile mysteriously and change the subject. Let the legend grow naturally without my input. The truth was dramatic enough without embellishment. Sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd think about that receipt and how one small piece of paper had changed everything. If I'd taken Kyle's jacket to the cleaners a day earlier or later, I might have never found it. If he'd been slightly more careful about hiding his affair, I might still be with him, oblivious and unhappy without even knowing it. Fate worked in mysterious ways, often disguised as hotel receipts in jacket pockets. I'd learned important lessons through this whole experience. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Document everything carefully before taking action. Focus on facts rather than emotions when seeking justice. And most importantly, never underestimate a tax attorney who feels betrayed. We're trained to find hidden money and uncover financial secrets. Applying those skills to personal situations made us absolutely devastating opponents. Kyle had essentially brought a knife to a nuclear war, and he'd lost spectacularly. 3 years after our breakup, I heard through mutual friends that Kyle had moved to another state and was working in some non-legal compliance job. His law license remained suspended, though technically he could apply for reinstatement eventually. I doubted he'd ever practice law again, though. The combination of ethical violations and malpractice lawsuits made him basically unhireable in any serious legal position. His reputation was permanently damaged, his name forever associated with professional misconduct. Meanwhile, I'd become one of the firm's most successful partners, bringing in major clients and handling complex cases. My specialty in professional ethics and legal malpractice had become incredibly profitable. Companies paid substantial fees for my expertise in preventing exactly the kind of violations Kyle had committed. The irony was delicious. I'd literally built a thriving career partially based on my ex-boyfriend's catastrophic failures. You genuinely couldn't make this stuff up. Looking back, I felt zero regrets about any of it. I'd done what was legally and ethically correct, and I'd been rewarded professionally. Kyle had done what was dishonest and unethical, and he'd faced appropriate consequences. The system had worked exactly as intended. Justice had been served, my career had flourished, and I'd learned valuable lessons about trust, integrity, and the importance of reading credit card statements carefully. Professor Whiskers purred beside me, the only male I truly trusted these days, and honestly, that was perfectly fine with me.